The Romans, in order to maintain power and inspire terror in their subjects, resorted to various forms of torture and cruelty. This dark underbelly existed beneath the splendor that was displayed. Let's take a more in-depth look at the horrifying methods that they utilized to torture their captives. Crucifixion was known to be one of the cruelest and most notorious methods of torture used in ancient Rome. In this execution technique, the person was either nailed or bound to a wooden cross, and then they were left to hang until they died. It was a drawn-out and terrible process that resulted in excruciating pain, thirst, and suffocation. Crucifixion was not only employed as a method of carrying out the sentence of death, but also as a deterrence for potential rebels and lawbreakers. The Romans used crucifixion as a form of capital punishment because they believed it was an effective means of both prolonging the victim's suffering and serving as a deterrence to future potential offenders. The procedure consisted of nailing or binding the condemned person to a wooden cross and then leaving them to hang until they died. There is no way to adequately describe the mental and emotional anguish that crucifixion causes. The victim's arms would be forced out to their sides and attached to the horizontal beam of the cross using nails hammered into their wrists or hands. The person would then be crucified. After that, their feet were fastened to the vertical beam by either having nails driven into them or by having ropes tied around them. The victim would suffer tremendous pain as a result of the nails ripping into their flesh and the strain that was placed on their limbs as they hung from the cross. As time went on, the weight of the body would exert an incredible amount of strain on the diaphragm, which made it increasingly harder to breathe. The struggle of the victims to take a breath would result in a drawn-out and excruciating death from asphyxiation. Another excruciating part of the crucifixion was that it caused him to lose his body fluids. The victim's body was in a posture that made it difficult for them to reach for a drink of water, which resulted in a severe case of thirst, delirium, organ failure, and finally death would be the end results of dehydration if left untreated for an extended period of time. The crucifixion was not only a painful ordeal from a bodily standpoint, but it was also a harrowing ordeal for Jesus on a spiritual level. The condemned were frequently put on display in public settings, providing onlookers with a gruesome show to watch as they passed by. This public display was intended to induce fear and to maintain the Roman state's authority over its citizens. The Romans reserved the practice of crucifixion for the execution of certain criminals, including those guilty of revolt, sedition, or high treason. It was particularly prevalent for persons who were considered adversaries of the state, such as slaves. Those who dared to resist the authority of the Romans were confronted with the gruesome sight of crucified bodies lined up along highways and in public places. Crucifixion was a common form of execution in ancient Rome. Nevertheless, its use extends back much further than the Roman Empire and was common in other ancient civilizations as well. It is possible to trace its roots back to the Persians and the Assyrians, who employed it as a method of meting out punishment and humiliating people in public. The Romans had a number of cruel practices at their disposal, one of which was known as the Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull, also known as the Sicilian Bull, was a terrifying and ugly device that served both as a method of torture and as a source of entertainment for the general people. It was a metal device in the shape of a bull that was supposed to inflict unspeakable misery on those who were held captive in it. The notion of the brazen bull was one that was equal parts creative and cruel in its execution. The hollow inside of the bull made it possible to place a person inside, and the individual's painful screams and begs for mercy would escape through pipes that were particularly built, creating a spooky likeness to the roaring of a bull. The victim would be sealed within the bull, and a fire would be started directly underneath them. The sentenced person would slowly roast to death as the metal heated up, suffering excruciating anguish as their flesh was consumed by the flames, as the flesh was being consumed. Because the victim's screams were made to sound like those of a helpless animal, the brazen bull was not only used as a manner of inflicting physical pain, but it was also used as a way to humiliate the victim. The brazen bull was given to Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas in Sicily, by Perillos of Athens, the designer of this devilish weapon. Perillos was from Athens. Phalaris was able to personally feel the screams and noises of suffering because, according to the legend, the first test that Perillos' creation put Phalaris through was actually endured by Perillos himself. Perillos was rescued in the end, but the brazen bull went on to become a popular device of torture in ancient Rome. During the reign of Emperor Nero, who was infamous for his cruelty and sadism, the brazen bull was frequently employed as a public display. This was especially common during Nero's time in power. The bloodthirsty spectators would cheer wildly as they watched the gruesome deaths of those who dared to oppose or defy the Roman Empire. The screams of the victims would resound throughout the arenas, exciting the crowds as they observed the horrific fate befalling anyone who dared to oppose or confront the Roman Empire. The Romans' goal to maintain control over their subjects by the use of terror and to inspire fear in the hearts of their subjects was symbolized by the brazen bull. Its application was not restricted to individuals who were considered political adversaries. Rather, it was also used as a form of punishment for a variety of offenses, which further exemplified the cruelty of the Roman legal system. The brazen bull is not only a horrifying example of one of the most inhumane forms of torture that was used in ancient Rome, but it also serves as a reminder of the ability for human cruelty over the course of history. It is a glaring example of the extent that people have gone to in order to fulfill their needs for power, control, and pleasure. Coming up next on our agenda is either the scourge or the flagellum. This type of whip was used as an implement of torture and comprised of numerous strands of leather that were embedded with shards of bone, metal, or glass. The sufferer would be flogged viciously, causing their flesh to shred and putting them through excruciating suffering. Scourging was frequently followed by public floggings, in which the condemned person would be subjected to harsh beatings in front of an audience. Scourging was considered a kind of corporal punishment. Moving on, let's investigate one of the most inhumane methods, which is known as the rack. This apparatus was intended to stretch the body of the victim, progressively dislocating their joints and tearing their muscles, tendons, and ligaments in the process. There were occasions when more weights were added to make the experience even more excruciating. The rack was employed both as a form of torture and as a technique for eliciting confessions from the subject. Last but not least, we come to the heinous practice known as damnatio ad bestias, which literally translates to condemnation to the beasts. This consisted of releasing the captives into an arena that was inhabited by wild animals such as lions, tigers, and bears. The condemned would be powerless and defenseless against the devouring animals because they would have no way to fight themselves. This terrible method of death was a popular spectacle during the gladiatorial games, offering bloodthirsty crowds with gruesome entertainment in the form of gruesome amusement. Condemnation to the beasts was a form of execution that was also used as a form of entertainment during the gory performances that were common in the Roman Empire. This horrifying practice consisted of sending captives to a brutal and frequently lethal encounter with wild and dangerous creatures by throwing them into an arena where the arena was filled with wild and dangerous animals. The sentence of condemnation to the beasts was a sort of capital punishment that was reserved for persons who were found guilty of extremely terrible crimes or who were considered enemies of the state. Amphitheaters, such as the world-famous Colosseum in Rome, were the settings for this kind of public display of entertainment. The condemned individuals, who were helpless and had no way to defend themselves, were going to be unleashed into the arena where they would encounter a range of dangerous beasts. There were a variety of animals, including lions, tigers, bears, and even wild boars, that were utilized to carry out this horrible kind of punishment. The condemnation to the beasts had a dual purpose in mind when it was created. To begin, it was utilized as a means of execution, guaranteeing the condemned a violent and frequently horrible end to their lives. The savage beasts would rip and maul their prey, causing unfathomable levels of anguish and misery for their unfortunate victims. Second, it served as a form of entertainment for the ravenous masses that had flocked to watch these bloody displays. The Romans had a morbid obsession with bloodshed and death, and the condemnation to the beasts provided them with a grisly outlet for their curiosity in these topics. It was an opportunity for the general public to experience the thrill of watching human beings go up against fierce and dangerous beasts. It is important to note that some of the people who were sacrificed by throwing them to the beasts were accomplished combatants or gladiators who were compelled to face an almost certain death as part of their public acts or as a form of punishment. These combatants would participate in a fight to the death, providing an additional source of tension and excitement for the audience. It was not just male criminals who were subjected to the inhumane practice of condemnation to the beasts. Women, children, and even children as young as 5 years old may be sentenced to this cruel punishment if they were considered enemies of the state or suspected of significant crimes. The crowd would cheer and take pleasure in the violent display of power and domination that the beasts would put on as they tore their victims apart. These shows were meant to serve as a constant reminder of the power wielded by the Roman Empire and the repercussions of challenging its authority. As we investigate the intricacies of the Roman system of torture, we have a responsibility to recognize the great anguish that was inflicted upon an uncountable number of people. The population was meant to be intimidated and controlled using these measures, which, despite their brutality, were designed to ensure obedience, and stifle dissent. Our investigation into the sinister customs of ancient Rome comes to a close with this spine-chilling look at the condemnation to the beasts. Let us not forget the lives that were taken and the unimaginable anguish that was brought upon those who were forced to endure such a dreadful tragedy. Come back with us the following time as we explore further fascinating facets of our common past. Until then, remember to keep your sense of wonder and curiosity. Remember to give a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you watching.